are listening to episode 195 of Mitolife Radio. I'm your host, Matt Blackburn, and today I'm interviewing Shawn Bean. Shawn Bean is a functional medicine specialist, a clinical nutritionist. He has a bachelor's of science in exercise science and has earned multiple certifications from the World Institute of Integrative Health Science. He's certified in neuroendoimmunology, NLP, and clinical hypnotherapy. He's studied the neurology of autism, depression, chronic fatigue, Lyme, weight loss, GI imbalances, environmental toxicity, hormones, genetic mutations, nutrition, lifestyle modifications, and a lot more. He's also a former competitive bodybuilder and a lot of fun to talk to. I took so many notes in this interview. He's really an encyclopedia of knowledge, and it's amazing that he can remember all the stuff that he does. He shares his journey of recovering from low testosterone, alkaline phosphatase imbalance. He explains what being floxed means. A lot of people have been dealing with that, and so he shares his journey of how he recovered from using fluoroquinolones, class of antibiotics. He talks about different genetic mutations, different pathways, the NRF2 pathway, talks about mold toxicity, MTHFR, sulfation, glucuronidation, pyroglutamic acid. He covers a lot of ground, so definitely be ready to take notes with this episode. We dive pretty deeply into B12, how to transport it, utilize it. He's a huge fan of glutathione, not necessarily supplements, but just the glutathione system. So he talks quite a bit about glutathione and why it's so important. He talks about lactoferrin, the arachidonic acid and EPA ratio, H. pylori, Saccharomyces boulardii therapy, and so much more. So enjoy the show. Here is Shawn Bean. Okay, we are here with Shawn Bean. Welcome to the show.
It's a pleasure to be here, Matt.
Yeah, this is a long time coming. We've been talking, I think, off and on for a few years, and I really appreciate how you really pick apart protocols and information and dive deep into the literature to find out what's going on. Before we started recording, we were talking about B12 and calcification and glutathione, and these are all huge topics where protocols have been built around them and supplement routines or whatever. But what you realize is there's so much nuance, right, and so much individuality, and that's where the topic of today comes in of diagnostics, blood work, how to look at all these different lab tests and kind of form a puzzle picture that you can see for the individual. But before we get into that, how long have you been doing this, and how did you get into this work?
I've been doing this for approximately 15 years. One of the reasons I got into this was my own, like many others out there, my own health journey. I was a national level bodybuilder, and I pushed my body to the limit, and I started having circadian imbalances because I read an article that, get up at 3 o'clock in the morning, have your pre-workout meal, go back to bed, get up at 5 o'clock and train. Well, being young and dumb, I didn't understand circadian pattern back then. So what that was doing was that was setting my immune system for malfunction. That went on for a while. Then I noticed I started having GI tracts before the last competition, and everything was on par. It was just, as soon as I got done the competition, my immune system was so compromised that out of celebration, bodybuilders go to sushi bars. And we were there for well over 6.5 hours. I probably gained 22 pounds of water fluid. We actually had to take one of the people to the ER room because he gained like 30 pounds. He had to get LASIK done because he was so depleted. But what I learned there was when you go get sushi, don't ever go to the all-you-can-eat sushi places because the handling of them, it may not be as par. They don't go to the market at the right time. You have the leftovers and you hope they don't have contaminations. And within 48 hours, I just wasn't feeling well. So I started to get bloating and constipation. I felt my system slow down. I got, all the symptoms of what I now know is dysbiosis. And also the amount of sushi I had, practitioner said I might have had a mercury overload from it because I had close to 125 pieces on top of a hibachi bar. But I didn't have no alcohol. And I did take my ginger capsules during that time. The other thing that led up to this was I started to go on this salad kick. And one of my meals would have been, when I look back, the amount of oxalates I was taking in was astronomical. I was probably pushing anywhere between 1.5 grams to 2 grams of oxalates a day for a prolonged period of time, about 8 weeks. Because I would go through 2 bags of spinach because I thought spinach was good for you, and I would make a spinach salad, this huge spinach salad with nuts and berries, like everybody talks about. And I'd have I had a little bit of cottage cheese because I found out, lactose intolerance didn't go well. So, we were doing yams. We were probably doing, 12-ounce yams. So when you figure the bag of spinach, I literally was going through 10 to 15 bags of spinach a week. Okay. And that's where I kind of started putting the pieces together just probably in the past. I'm like, wow, I just created oxalate disaster. Okay. And then after my contest, I started to feel slowed down. I started to have, GI related problems. And normally you gain weight coming back off of the contest because you eat 4,000 calories a day, but my weight wasn't coming back. I normally gained between 15, 20 pounds after contest. It wasn't coming back like it was. So right then told me that I probably had a parasite or had something going on GI related. I went to the doctor, like, listen, man, I'm 215 pounds. I normally go to 235. Okay. And something's off. So they took some blood work. And the first thing I noticed was the alkaline phosphatase was low. It was in the low 40s. And that was 15 years ago I picked up on that. So after I got that done, they ran my testosterone level. It came back 35. Okay. Huh. Now, do I admit, being a bodybuilder, I used, we have to compete. We used anabolic steroids. But the thing is I stopped them way before, coming into contest because I like to go in, dry, so to speak. Mm. And the dosages I was doing was, a drop in the bucket compared to what other guys were doing. A lot of guys get, dude, you're natural. Okay. Because I relied on training. I had great genetics and I could pretty much know my body. My old training partner was Dr. John Berardi from Precision Nutrition. We used to travel 3 hours, 2-3 times a week to go train. We did for a year. And I learned a lot from him with his massive eating program that we were doing way back in the early 1990s. But things just weren't right. My testosterone, you're just a little bit low on testosterone. So the guy wanted to give me like 2.5 milligrams of androgen, which is a total joke. But things progressed and I started to have neurological conditions, which were more of a schizophrenic. It's where I started to hear voices. That was probably the neurological excitation coming up from the glutamate and the low GABA. And I was also doing glutamine at the time. So I was trying to push that up even more. Once you understand the metabolic pathways, you can go back and look to see where you screwed up, and actually reconstruct it from a reverse engineer standpoint. That's the way I approach stuff, is reverse engineering. You can give me the test, I can reverse engineer it to give you the gene expression, to give you the symptoms, and or go with symptoms, give you the test results without even seeing the test results. So by reverse engineering that, I'm like, wow, this is gut. And then I moved into a house that had black mold on top of this.
Huh.
So I was helping out a friend who was paraplegic, who was actually he had cerebral palsy. So 20, probably just within the past 3 years, my mom goes, yeah, we were cleaning up black mold off the kitchen floor, okay? Because he couldn't take care of himself. So here I was in this moldy area, and next thing you know, within 1 month, I woke up, total amnesia, stuttering, with shakiness. I didn't know who I was, where I was for over 3 hours. And that was when that was when my day changed. That's when the journey really begun, okay? And the repair. So I worked with a couple of functional medicine doctors. They're like, wow, they put you on your thyroid's low. The next thing you know, you push your adrenals down. So they didn't do adrenals. If I was going to kick myself, one of the tests I should have done and spent the money should have been the adrenal profile that they had back then. If I would have done that, I would have known what was going on. I went to a naturopath, and he's like, candida. I'm like, okay. And your liver is congested. And everybody told me I had congested liver. But they couldn't break through. And when I did the stool sample test 9 months later, after losing 100 pounds of lean muscle tissue, while eating 3,000, 4,000 calories a day, it came out like 9 different types of infections. So they put me on this protocol, I guess. And guess which one it was? It was Cipro. They put me on Cipro, which later I found out that I was Floxed. Because I guess it was 2011, it came out with a black box warning. And Genova just had their genetic profile done to tell you what drugs. So here I am. I just did this $400 genetic test to tell me that I shouldn't do fluoroquinolones. Okay. Now, what happened was I had a stool sample testing done from a very well parasitologist in Arizona, and he picked up some parasites, and he said, "Hey, you got to use gentamicin for it." Okay. And I'm like, okay. So I went in. They didn't have gentamicin, so they gave me fluoroquinolone, which was Cipro, and then the other one. I'm drawing a blank. It's another fluoroquinolone outside of that they use for sinus infections. Just drawing a blank right now. But they gave me that one as an alternative to gentamicin. And within 2 days, I felt like I was going to rip my shoulders. I was working out, and I felt like it was going to rip right off the bone. Levaquin, I think it was. They give Levaquin. And within like a couple days, and then I went to the gym, and then one of my friends was like, I hadn't seen him for a while. I'm like, oh, what happened? I tore my shoulder. I tore my Achilles. I tore this. I said, what did you do? He said, I went in, they gave me Cipro. So he actually was repairing all his muscle damage from all the stuff that, from Cipro then. And a couple other bodybuilders I know have been damaged from it too. And I actually helped develop a lot of the Floxed protocols they use today. The NAD therapy, that was my research. The high vitamin C was also my contributions. And the amazing thing is I found 8 of the genetic genes associated with being floxed within 30 minutes. I did it on a podcast with Dr. Jess Armine. And You were talking Floxies. They were talking Floxies, and I just went in and did all the mitochondrial research. And a lot of those genes today are now found on a lot of the genetic testing with some of my contributions.
Well, Shawn, and just to define, can you define being floxed? Because a lot of my listeners probably don't know what that means. But
what Flox is when I look at history, I always want to look at what medications they've taken in the past. And if you had what's called fluoroquinolones, which is Avelox, Levoquin, or Cipro, there is potential damage to ligaments. There's also literature anecdotally supporting that once you stop them, you still have mitochondrial damage that continues as a result. And not everyone's going to respond to that. So I do know a lot of the practitioners I work with that are in generalized medicine, from talking to me, they use it as a last resort. But a lot of ones will give it to you if, UTI infection, here's some Cipro, okay? But remember, it also can be life-saving because ciprofloxacin is also one of the antibiotics that you're less likely to become resistant to. So it's a clinical call on the practitioner. But if you're coming in with if a female comes in with UTI, you just don't give them Cipro as first line of defense, and a lot of practitioners do. So being flox basically means taking this medication for whatever reason and having a negative reaction to it that can affect your tendons and ligaments, specifically in your shoulders, your calves, and not realizing like, whoa, that makes sense that it happened right around that time that I was treating the gut infection that they gave me Cipro for, or that they gave me Avelox or Levoquin for a sinus infection. Okay. 5-10 years ago. So as a clinician, we have to look at that in clinical history as a potential, because if people have not gotten better, you have to dig and dig. And one of the clinicians that I really enjoy is Dr. Peter Rouse. And one of the things he told me, he said, you keep asking yourself why until you can't ask. You keep asking yourself why until you can't ask no longer. And that was probably the best piece of advice to me as a clinician is keep digging. And then it's like when I was sick, I was on a forum and one of the testing results that I actually caught was low ceruloplasmin and low copper. And that was in 2004. I caught on to that. But nobody knew what it was. Nobody understood. Okay. And here's where my clinical experience comes in with that. There are a lot of practitioners out there that have done incredible research into different areas, but this is what I found to be true. When you correct the underlying cause, the ceruloplasmin and copper levels will start to rise on their own. I've had multiple cases of mold. I had multiple cases of glutathione that was not properly being recycled, and you start to see them rise as a result. And as I mentioned before, the glutathione oxidized versus reduced ratio, I feel, is the number one identifier of a person's resistance to disease. And as a clinician, the clinician can order this test through HDI, which is a laboratory out in New Jersey, and they can do an a la carte from the practitioner. And it will probably be one of the best $140 that you can spend, because if you know that ratio, you know what approaches to take and what not to take. You know, to give, not to give the wrong glutathione, or it's going down the wrong direction to where you think glutathione is good for us, and actually it's making matters worse. But at least with this ratio, it will give you an indication of what pathways to work on. Your glutathione, your GSR, your GSTs, your other pathways, your NRF2 pathway, because a lot of people that take glutathione don't respond well because their NRF2 pathway is not working. Because NRF2 pathway has been shown to increase glutathione synthesis. It increases the transferases. It also helps with the recycling too. And one of the best things I found to utilize with that is actually the hydrogen water tablets. They have been a profound effect. And I like the idea of modulating NRF2 versus trying to force it, because your body turns on and off, and the hydrogen water tablets taken appropriately will modulate that. I'm always about modulation, letting the body go in the direction it's supposed to, and not try to force things when it's inappropriate. So getting back to your question, because I digressed a little bit.
That's great.
So the copper and ceruloplasmin were the first things. Nobody knew what they were. And what that did is that led me into my that cyclic pattern of thinking, like a dog chasing its tail. And that's what a person on the forum who identified that, she goes, Shawn, you're autistic. I said, what do you mean? She goes, you have classical signs of autism. And when I went back, I looked at when I was younger, had all the classical signs. I would flap my hands, I would make gurgling sounds. But the weird thing was I was antisocial, but what the weird thing was I was an athlete. And that made the diagnosis or that kind of question whether I was autistic. But I went to child development because I had an extremely high IQ, but I was dyslexic. Okay. I had a speech impediment. I didn't speak until I was 4 years old. Okay. Wow. Now I know that actually that came from a gene expression called GAMT. GAMT is a gene expression or pathway associated with creatine. That's why a lot of autistic kids I work with, I give them creatine, L-carnitine, and what that does is it works on all those pathways to support the methylation and also to support the mitochondria. And just by doing that, that's why a lot of the autistic kids are hypotonic. They have hypotonia. They lack creatine. As soon as you give them creatine, next thing you know, they're building muscle. They're actually being able to swim. I've had cases where within 5 weeks, the guy comes back. He's like, Shawn, my son is now swinging on the jungle gym. What did you do? Okay. And sometimes it's just something simple. Give him an Epsom salt bath. Get him talking. Work on the sulfation pathway. And sulfation pathway is one of the factors that is necessary for copper dysregulation. Big time.
Wow.
And,
I was going to say, Shawn, you just brought up the the GMT gene, and that's one big reason why I wanted to have you on the show. Is I just interviewed the CEO of Self-Decode, where he uses AI algorithms and polygenic risk scoring, and I've been trying to learn how to read it. I mean, they make it stupid simple with the health reports, but you can actually search individual genes and then see what mutations you have. But my friend Dr. Tyler Hansner that I had on the show just told me this morning, he's like, well, just because you have an alternative allele, it doesn't mean it's bad. It could be a benefit. And you just see that it's mutated. I mean, I hope we get to a place where it's easy to read ourselves, but
number one thing is I don't follow genes no more. The reason being is if you know the gene expression, do you need to see it on paper? Like, for example, I have people that come to me, they're like, or here's how I learned about this. I wouldn't say the word killed, but could have. What happened was I learned about gene expressions through two hippies. They were 7 years old. They were organic farmers. They were anti-aging specialists. Okay. Perfect health. They came to me because I was a genetic guy. Okay. So here's what happened. They came into me with the only triple homozygous CBS pathways that I've seen so far. Okay. So what did we do? We dropped sulfur, added molybdenum, right? Well, guess what? You need sulfur to control what? Blood pressure and heart rate. Okay? So you drop the sulfur, add the molybdenum. What does that do? Wipe sulfur out of your body even faster. So think about the gene expression. You're like, oh my God, homozygous, triple homozygous. Never expressing. What did it result in? Two different types of blood pressure medication with a beta blocker for the heart. Because it shifted them so fast. Because I dropped their sulfur and increased the molybdenum to 500 micrograms, which was a specific regimen back then, okay, to do. And that's when I learned that they were like they were catastrophic, and they were in their 60s and 70s thriving, and they were basically bedbound. So I'm like, listen, stop. And they were able to get off the blood pressure medicine, regulate their system. And that is the lesson that I learned, that just because you're red doesn't mean you give a specific supplement. Because if I didn't know what I was doing then, they could have progressed. And I just changed those little variables. Because when I make recommendations for variations on variables, it's methodically changed up every 3-4 days, and it's strategically placed upon the individualized biochemistry, the gene expression, and also take in consideration, look upstream, downstream, side stream. Because we have to be able to look not just ahead, like for example, if you have a person who's comped and they have MTHFR and you give them 5-methylfolate, well, guess what? That's going to push the gas pedal in the count. I have people contact me with MTHFR, driving to the hospital when they're heart attacking at 150, 160, because a practitioner told them to take 2 or 3 milligrams of 5-methylfolate when their comp was expressing. That's why when I've revamped my approaches, methylation is down at the bottom. It's sulfation, glucuronidation are the top, because everything trickles from there. Because what happens is it's called the sulfation bucket. You have your phenols, you have your histamines, you have sulfation, and you have your glutathione. Okay? What happens is when your sulfation bucket gets overloaded, it's going to overflow. Your histamines are going to start to overflow. Then your phenols are going to overflow. And then the phenols feed into the bucket, knocking down the sulfation pathway, because of the fact a lot of the organisms inside your GI tract are phenol producers. And what they're trying to do is they are trying to regulate the microbiome to shift it to an adaptogenic response against something. So when you see Clostridia rise, when you see that what looks pathogenic, it is most likely an adaptive state, because hydrogen sulfide is one of the mechanisms our body produces glutathione, as stated in a study that I provided on my Facebook. It's one of the mechanisms. So what happens is hydrogen sulfide rises up. Look at the hydrogen sulfide producing organisms. Okay, you normally see them on stool sample test. Okay, they're trying to help out because your body's not getting glutathione because your sulfation pathway is jammed. So once you unjam that sulfide, you may have to reduce phenols. You may have to reduce, may have to bring an Epsom salt bath. Okay. I've given Epsom salt bath to autistic children when I know that they had the phenol sulfur transferase issue. Okay. That gets jammed. 80 to 90% of them have. Doctors aren't looking at it. They looked at it a long time ago, but they're not looking at it now. Okay. So guess what? You remove the phenols, you give them a little bit of the no phenol, and then you work on the pathway by giving them Epsom salt. The Epsom salt bypasses the digestive tract because the sulfur comes in, the hydrogen reducing bacteria get a hold of it, produce hydrogen sulfide or hydrogen sulfate, and then that feeds back into the sulfation pathway, getting jammed up again. So what I've done is I've learned these negative feedback loops. When you look at the body from a biohack standpoint, you've got to pull yourself back and look at things on a three-dimensional holographic view, not one-dimensional. Traditional medicine looks at one-dimensional. Functional medicine is a good starting, but their philosophies have to change. I don't follow a lot of functional medicine anymore. I don't like their philosophies. They're getting too much into not all, but some are getting in too much marketing and pushing supplements. And a lot of practitioners who are really good practitioners have gone off into the social media realm and are doing protocol-based. And I have a lot of clients and even practitioners come back to me and it's like, yeah, following their protocols almost killed one of my clients. Okay.
Yeah. And like almost every protocol has that story, right? It's fascinating. And you mentioned glutathione a bunch. A lot of people listening to this are probably going to be like, well, what about my liposomal glutathione? I remember going to the Bulletproof conference years ago, and they were handing that out like candy, the little syringe, with the orange flavored liposomal glutathione. Could that actually harm people if what you're saying?
It's the type of glutathione. Okay. It's got to be recycled. If they give you reduced glutathione, there's a less likelihood that's going to go to oxidize. Okay. But here's the thing too. When you're looking at a lab, you got to know, is it the synthase? Is it the recycling? Or is it transport system? Okay. Like on an organic acid test, for example, there's polyglutamic acid. Okay. First of all, a lot of practitioners don't know how to interpret that test. Okay. And here's the reason why. And I've watched people, when people send me their labs, you can see when their well is draining and goes bone dry. Okay. Because what happens is your body, your polyglutamic acid rises first. Okay. That means that you're just you have a well and you're draining it. Okay. It's as fast as it's coming in, it's going out. Over time, what happens is that well starts to go dry. And then what happens is you'll see the flip. You'll see the pyroglutamic acid go to the lower end. But because it's at the lower end, it's identified as non-clinical, which is not true. Because I've seen mine, okay? You could see when my mold exposure happened. You could see how my, you could see how my phase 1, phase 2 liver shifted to more hippuric, okay? Because the sulfation pathway was the sulfation and the glucuronidation pathway. And it really depends on the type of mold that you have, which pathway gets handled, okay? So with that being said, people are doing glutathione for mold when maybe the mold that you have is more glucuronidation pathway. Maybe you need more calcium glucarate. I just worked with a very prestigious practitioner who was very, very sick, and she was not responding to glutathione. And we knew she had a phenol problem, okay? And once we took care of that phenol problem, added the Epsom salts, added the glucuronidation with the calcium glucarate, she was able to tolerate glutathione, okay? She had vitiligo. Vitiligo is from a glutathione deficiency. It's from mold exposure, which she had, okay? We reversed that. And what happens is when you look in clinical studies, phenol toxicity is one of the major causes of vitiligo because it's toxicity in the body. There was a study produced out of University of Massachusetts that confirmed that. So when you have a phenol overload, what you're doing is that you're overloading your sulfation pathway. When you overload your sulfation pathway, you're draining the swamp of glutathione and also glucuronidation pathway, because that's the backup system. Glucuronidation is the backup system when everything else goes down. So when you're talking about Dave Asprey using calcium glucarate, he was smart about that, because the calcium glucarate actually was able to take some weight off of the other pathways till they catch up.
Interesting. Wow. Have you used ozone therapy, Shawn? My friend Charles Barber got me into it, like insufflations and the ear insufflations, rectal insufflations, and I've seen studies that increases glutathione synthesis, also ascorbate, and obviously kills pathogens and has a lot of benefits. Just wondering if you've ever experimented with it or used it with clients.
I haven't experimented with it, but clients have. They use it a lot for blood ozone. They do a lot with the ozone for blood in regards to pathogens specifically. Mm-hmm. Sometimes ozone people feel good, but because they might have a superoxide dismutase blockage, or that pathway is not working because superoxide is the backup system for glutathione. And then a lot of times you see uric acid levels go high. When uric acid levels go high, uric acid levels going high when there's no presence of gout, that's like an antioxidant. That's basically when your other systems are down. Okay? Because a lot of times uric acid goes up, that's why if you have a ketogenic diet and you're more prone to gout, a ketogenic diet, when you're prone to gout, can cripple you. It put one of my colleagues into a situation to where his uric, he was trying to lose weight, he was doing a keto diet, and next thing you know, his gout, he ended up in the hospital. He had to, learn to all walk again because it was really, really bad, So that's why specific diets may not work for everybody. And a lot of people on the bulletproof diet, I see a lot of people with the bulletproof diet with their CACs going up into the several hundreds, even into the thousands, because they're doing this high saturated fat and their APOE44, which they need to be, APO34 and APO44. You got to be careful with saturated fats, because APO44, what happens is, I found out that number one, your demand for K2 goes way up. Okay. And what K2 does is K2 works off a principle called PXR. And when you look in the study for PXR, what it does is just insane. It actually is one of the major mechanisms for liver regeneration. It works on the phase 2 pathway. It helps all the major antioxidants in your system that nobody's looking at. It helps to make sure calcium goes in the right spots. K2 is actually anti-estrogenic itself. So K2 has been highly overlooked in its potential. K2 is also one of the most powerful ways to detoxify xenoestrogens itself. So, that's why when it comes to K2, I normally have people, 200 micrograms, 300 micrograms, or if they want to do the Japanese food, they could do that if they wanted to.
Do you think, Shawn, that's why people don't respond well to, like, I sell vitamin E and I promote Rosita cod liver oil. And sometimes people will say, it gave me this crazy rash, this crazy reaction, and the substance was toxic. And, you're promoting something that's toxic. And I'm like, well, maybe you were depleting, like the old Weston A. Price thing was take the cod liver oil with the butter oil to get to K2. I don't know where the vitamin E was coming in there, but I think there's a balance of those four, right? A, D, E, and K. And
because I think one of my colleagues, Michael McAvoy, he was looking into vitamin E, and we found that wheat germ oil was like one of the highest sources that you can actually apply topically to get vitamin E. Because vitamin E is vitamin E can actually go inside and get into the bloodstream from topical application. A lot of the times, glutathione, I may have applied topically to the, like if somebody has Hashimoto's, I might take quicksilver or different forms of glutathione and have applied directly to the thyroid. And next thing you know, you see the antibodies come down because you're getting directly at the autoimmunity within the thyroid itself. You can also add black seed oil rubbed on to the thyroid. I've lowered antibodies that way. So there's a lot of things that you can do. And the thing with cod liver oil you have to watch out for is when you look at the red blood cell fatty acid profiles, you see high levels of DHA to lower levels of EPA. And what's happening is that is actually indication that the body is going more to a mitochondrial dysfunction. That is also causing what's called DAMPs and PAMPs to activate, which is not good because that causes mitochondrial dysfunction. That causes oxidative stress. And that usually means the body's in a potential cell danger response as a result. So again, the analysis of lab work by using the Omega Quant has been paramount, and knowing when to supplement and when not to supplement cod liver oil, because I have several autistic kids that were on cod liver oil, and once I pulled them off cod liver oil and worked on regulating their arachidonic acid by manipulation of leukotrienes and the phenols, because what happens is the phenols from the phenylsulfurate transferase pathway actually stimulate the leukotrienes. Then leukotrienes go and stimulate histamine responses in the mast cell. So if you shut it down from the source, that's how fish oils work. Fish oils shut down the leukotrienes. But there's another way you can do it. Okay? Leukotrienes go through what's called a 5-LOX pathway. Okay? 5-LOX pathway is one of the major sources. That's why that one singular works so well. It's a 5-LOX inhibitor. And if you look at the studies, as I dug into it further, what I found is I shared that study with a clinic that's a hyperbaric down in Florida. They were blown away by how singular may be able to be used to control leukotrienes and to reduce neurological inflammation in a lot of cases, because the literature is out there. Another way to lower leukotrienes can be fish oils, okay? But with fish oils, you have to be extremely careful because the source and also a lot of fish oils are just not EPA.
Have you seen the PRMs? I think those the pro-resolving mediators.
The pro-resolving mediators are very interesting. I need to do a little more research on them because I noticed that a lot of companies are adding them in. Very reputable companies are starting to add them in. They may be able to modulate a lot of things, but through the work of Michael McAvoy, who's bringing back Revici, he's getting deeper into how to use different lipids to get the same results, and knowing when to utilize them, which is amazing. Because he from the results that he told me, it's like, Shawn, he's like, I had this person, had this incredible, inflammation and was gone within 15 minutes. So he would be a great person to have on.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'd love to. So I have a question for you, Shawn. If my genetic report says likely higher levels of arachidonic acid based on, FADS 1 and 2 genes.
FADS 1, FADS 2. Yep.
What would I do for that? If I've
number one is a lot of the times in red blood cell, you'll always see an inverse relationship with omega-6 and omega-3s. What that basically means is you always want to have the parental high and come down. But what we're seeing in the red blood cell, we're seeing just opposite. We're seeing the ALA on the lower side, despite, taking in walnuts and things like that. And that's a metabolic shift, okay? I see a lot of people with low ALA, and I always refer to it as cellular incest, because the parents give birth to the kids, not the other way around. It doesn't go one way. But if you look at the omega-6s, you can see how it starts high and then comes down low to DGLA to GLA into arachidonic acid. Okay. In your situation, this is what I would do. Okay. From what information that I have, there's two different options. Number one, take your urinary pH. If your urinary pH is acid, then therefore your body probably needs a little more sulfur, or you're having problems with sulfation. Okay. If you are more alkaline, then most likely you're probably higher the alkalinity is more likely a gut infection. A lot of people that have UTIs usually have high alkalinity. People with severe dysbiosis will have alkalinities of 8.5. And also, when you're looking at alkalinity, Dr. Circus's information is awesome. And using bicarbs is a huge factor because bicarb deficiency has a huge input. Because I don't get too much into that, that alkalinity and diet for cancer and stuff like that. I had a case that went to a clinic. They put her on a high alkaline diet. It accelerated the tumors because what happened was her body was so alkaline, her body started producing acids to counteract it. And once we shifted her back from a plant-based diet more to a higher protein, moderate diet, lower, foods, she was probably also, at the time, I didn't think about it, oxalates too. She was probably getting oxalate overload, which was probably adding inflammation. And her body, because of her microbiome, couldn't address it. Theoretically, I think she had low bifidobacterium. Theoretically, I think she had, those organisms, because bifidobacterium helps to degrade oxalates itself. And, if you're running FUT2 combined with FADs, combined with PMT, combined with, APOE, and you have mold, you're definitely in danger zone. Okay. Because number one, you're not producing phosphatidylcholine to help get it out. Number two, the APOE44, that stores it. So you have a harder time getting rid of it. Okay. Then you got the heavy metals on top of that. And then you got the FADs 1 and FADs 2, you're going to be mast cell activation like crazy. Okay. So getting back to your question, using Ravici's approach, they have what's called lipid-bound sulfur. And lipid-bound sulfur is utilized when this is Michael's work, when the acid-base balance is below 6.2. When you're more alkaline, you would use a different formula. The other thing that I would use is, number one, Boswellia, frankincense. Those are the two most powerful, that's how they work. They actually are 5-LOX inhibitors. When I looked into the research, they're all 5-LOX inhibitors, and they also work on the COX, they works on the COX-2 pathway as well. So you're getting, that's why when you give an autistic kid frankincense and put in Epsom salt bath, they get dramatic results because you're shutting down the major inflammatory, you're shutting down the pro-inflammatory cytokines. Okay. You're also shutting down the leukotrienes because they're in the Epsom salt bath because you're shutting down the phenols. You shut down the phenols, you shut down the leukotrienes. It's the phenols that signal the leukotrienes. It's the leukotrienes that signal the mast cell. So that's why when you look at some of the research in regards to stabilizing phenols, they use high dosage fish oils because what they're doing is they're using the fish oils as a modulation for, guess what? The leukotrienes.
Interesting. Shawn, so like when you start working with a client, do you have tests that you tell everyone to get first? Because I have not had much blood work done. I sent you some of it. Maybe we'll have time to get into it a little bit, but my first test was in 2016, 17. And now I'm in a place where I'm excited to do, the ion panel, and I already have that sitting here. I have a GI stool map downstairs. I just started doing the omega quant tests. I plan to do their was it omega-3, where they look at 24 fatty acids, not just the DHA and EPA.
That's the one that I utilize. That's mainstream in my practice. And you can pull mold out of there. You can pull cell danger response. You can pull hypothyroidism, cellular hypothyroidism. You can pull, the leukotrienes. You can see the, when to use, when to use immunoprimrose oil, when to use GLA based upon, your GLA is low, but if they're running estrogen dominance, you don't want to use immunoprimrose oil because it's estrogenic. So therefore, you may want to use GLA from borage oil or currant oil. So that $99 test will tell you more information when it's properly interpreted. I mean, it cross-reference, it gives me an indication that there's cell danger response. Then it tells me if there's mold or Lyme on the radar. It tells me if there's a pathogen involved. It tells me, is your thyroid working? Tells me nutritional deficiencies. Because once you understand the pathways, you just reverse engineer it, And all these people that are zinc deficient, they're GLA deficient, is what it is. GLA, when you look in clinical research, it actually inserts itself into the zinc keyhole to activate it. So if you're coming down with zinc deficiency, your GLA is going to be low. But if you tried zinc and zinc and zinc and zinc, the more zinc you get, it's not going nowhere. Well, guess what? You need GLA to activate it. And that's all in clinical documentation.
Do you think the zinc sulfate test is accurate? Like the taste test where you swish it for 10 seconds in your mouth, a teaspoon, and if it tastes like water, you're deficient?
It's questionable. Same with the alkaline phosphatase. The alkaline phosphatase is supposed to be a zinc-driven enzyme, but actually it's actually, when you look at it from a clinical standpoint, it's copper dysregulation, but it all goes back to glutathione, phosphatidylcholine. It goes back to B12 indirectly and taurine. I just found an article that I think I posted up about how taurine increases alkaline phosphatase. And then you wonder why you're B12 deficient. Well, when you're B12 deficient, you piss out taurine like crazy. And that may be one of the reasons why the gastrointestinal tract is the mucosa barrier. Because when you look at taurine, what it does is it starts a whole cascade of the enzymatic reactions in your digestive tract. Hydrochloric acid, pancreatic enzyme release, bile flow. Studies have shown in cystic fibrosis that were resistant against pancreatic enzymes. They give them 1,000 milligrams or so of taurine per meal. And guess what happened? Their stool sample test, their steatocrit, literally dropped in half. And when you look at the GI MAPS test, I mean, my cutoff is like 8. When it gets above 8 on the steatocrit, that usually tells me it's clinical. And then that usually alerts me that, hey, there's a SIBO going on. There's other, bile issues going on. But a lot of times mold and SIBO, and they all goes back to your bile flow, but then it goes back to your thyroid too,
So when you say you're B12 deficient, do you mean in the cell, not in the bloodstream? Because maybe you saw in my lab work, my B12 was really high, but my transport was really low, the binding capacity, transcobalamin.
What I found about the transcobalamin pathway, or the whole of transcobalamin, I mean, when I looked at your lab test, yeah, it's transcobalamin, but it's also called holotranscobalamin. Okay, that's usually there's TCN1, TCN2, and TCN3. I think it's the TCN2 pathway. And what happens from that situation usually tells me, again, you're getting that competition from the hydrogen sulfide, that carbon monoxide, that nitric oxide. Maybe you have maybe having more of an INOS versus ENOS pathway going on. Maybe you have an infection going on that just has not been caught. Okay. So as it was mentioned in earlier talk, the carbon 1 metabolism is kind of like looking at it's kind of like the revenge of the nerds. It's kind of like the bullies versus the nerds. I explained to my clients about this. And also too, it's like, you're trying to get 100 people onto a school bus. It's just not going to get there, okay? Because the transport system. So what you have to do is you have to overload the transport system, okay? And I found clinical studies showing from a pharmacological standpoint that people, and actually we are way behind in this in regards to research. The British are way ahead of us, okay? UK has this under control, okay? And what you're looking at in your case is you're looking at a potential subclinical case of pernicious anemia. Okay. And what you would want to do is orally, I was down at 373. Okay. And normally you'll see low alkaline phosphatase, which is probably somewhere under 80. Okay. Or you might see methylmalonic acid on your urine high as a subclinical result. Okay. So in that standpoint, you have to treat it like pernicious anemia. Okay. But you have to make sure that the hydroxy you give, to hit pharmacological standpoint, you're probably looking at somewhere between 5 to 10, your serum levels should be up around the 5 to 10,000 mark to override that mechanism. Okay. That's why a lot of the practitioners, old school, they'll give you 5,000 milligrams or 10 grams. When I was under a specific practitioner, where I made the biggest gains was I was using IVPC with glutathione because I had mold. I mean, I turned around the fastest within 6 weeks. I had my gut healed. I put, I went from benching 225 to 315, back to 315 for 6, and my weight started coming back on. That was because I was using phosphatidylcholine and doing glutathione IVs, and I was on a regimen for the methylation, because what they were trying to do is she was trying to backdoor it. Okay, she loaded you up on a lot of riboflavin, and we did not have molybdenum. We did not use molybdenum at all, because what happens is I use uric acid as an indication of molybdenum. Okay, if your uric acid levels are low, then you're probably molybdenum deficient. Okay, if your uric acid levels are high, then super high, then you want to think about, hey, you might have some copper dysregulation going on, because uric acid and copper are highly interlinked. Okay, and when you look into the clinical research about alkaline phosphatase, guess what? Guess what comes up? Wilson's disease. Okay, wow. Copper toxicity as a potential mechanism.
Wow. So Shawn, when you said serum levels of B12 5,000 to 10,000 to override the mechanism, I've been reading a bunch of studies the last few weeks on this, and normal serum B12 or high serum B12 but low transcobalamin, and how do you treat it? And I found 3 or 4 or 5 studies that said you have to do weekly intramuscular injections of B12. Some studies say that's the only way. Dissolving lozenges don't work, liposomal doesn't work, capsules don't work. What are your thoughts on all that?
As I started to dig further, I found that glutathione may be one of the glutathione or glutathione recycling may be part of the equation. There was a study that I posted up about how you'd have super physiological amounts, but you need glutathione to activate it. And glutathione is necessary to activate. To
activate B12?
To activate B12 cellular level. People, when they look at minerals and stuff, you have to look at the activations and cofactors. If you reverse engineer the cofactors and know the metabolic pathways that cofactors work on, then it leads you to the situation. So like with you, I would probably see somewhat of a disturbance in the pyroglutamic acid pathway. I would probably see that probably your glutaric was going to be high because of you're probably peeing out B2 potentially. Okay. And 90% of people that do the organic acid test, guess what? Their glutaric is always high. Okay. And then you'll normally see like maybe your pantothenic acid being high, excretion too.
So high glutaric acid means probably B2 deficiency, you're saying?
Absolutely.
Okay.
That's and that's your recycler. That's your sulfation pathway. Because when you have high glutaric, you're not recycling glutathione. So in those situations, if you give glutathione, it might backfire. So when I look at when I look at diagnostic testing, I take the whole clinical picture in the board. And what I do is I said, oh, by the way, have you done glutathione IVs? You probably felt really, really bad on them. Like, oh my God, yeah, how'd you know? I said, you're not recycling it. Okay. And what that does is by using the methylation panel from HDI or getting, those tests done, it just validates it.
It sounds like you use the OATS test, the organic acids test, quite a bit, right? For the pyroglutamic acid and the glutaric, because it will show those two and more, right?
It will. That test for me does over $4,000 to $5,000 worth of lab work. Number
Wow.
two, it also shows me about 14 to 15 different gene expressions. And what I did is I crossed, I can actually get a Dutch test, reverse engineer it, and tell what's going to come back on the organic acid test. And I've done that before. I've been on the phone, talk to a person. Yeah, I have my organic test sitting in front of me. I said, yeah, number 53 is going to be on the high side. Number 10 is going to be to the right side. They're like, how did you know? I'm like, after you do several thousands of these, just listen to the person's symptoms will tell you where the markers are going to be,
Is the ion test? Because I have that. I'm just waiting to, make the time to do it. The ion panel, is that similar to the organic acids, or?
It's similar. It's similar, but what I do is I've learned to utilize other tools. If people have it, great, okay, but you can still pull majority of the data from an organic acid test, generalized blood work, and the omega quant. Because the omega quant and the information that they provide on there is not accurate in regards to. They have the arachidonic acid set at and I cross-referenced it. You're in the range, being at like 45. Okay. When you look at clinical data, in my clinical experience, you want the arachidonic acid EPA ratio between 4 to 7. And I had people that are actually clinical at 10.
Oh.
So the diagnostics from what these interpretations are could be slightly skewed, in my opinion. Plus, with the organic acid test, I know how to skew the results to show me the clinical picture. Because what happens is I have clients come into me and all their mole markers are dead smack in the middle. And I'm like, listen, after you take the creatine level and move it when you drop the creatine level down to 40, 45, 50, you're going to have a lateral shift so much to the right. And when I do that, that just totally changed the clinical picture. So if they're sitting on the yellow, that just moved them outside the range. And you're smack in the middle and it goes down low enough to 25 or 30, then you're way outside the range. So if you're sitting on the outside of the range and you're, and your clinician's like, oh, there's nothing wrong with you, but you're totally symptomatic, and because they don't look into the nuances, into the different, wow, you have a person whose pyrimidine pathways are not working right, which are folate, and then they're just a little bit on the edge side of a little outside the range, but not coming up. And you have a mother who's having miscarriages, and you look, and you're like, what type of I'm taking folic acid. I'm like, okay, you're having miscarriages. Well, they said, a practitioner said my folate was fine. No, okay. Number one is this is indication, this is not methyl, okay? This is folinic acid, okay? So what happens? You have a mother who's had miscarriages, and just from that simple organic acid test, you can say, by the way, some unknown person who's 45 years old, have you had miscarriages in the past? They're like, yeah. And it was, and I do it off the cuff. And they're like, how'd you know? I said, well, your MTHFR is expressing, your folic acid pathways are down, and all they had to do was give you probably folinic acid and a little bit of 5-methyl, and you would have been fine as a result. Because in our twins, I was monitoring my blood work of my wife, and her MCV started at the low at 90, and we're on like 1,500 milligrams of combination of folinic acid and 5-methyl. Okay, we saw the MCV starting to creep up because of the twins. So what we did was it went from 90 all the way up to like 96 or 97, it went up dramatically. Okay. So that told me the methylation was flying. So we actually added more folinic acid to compensate for it. Okay. Because it wasn't a high risk, but I just wanted to take precautions. And when I work with my clients that are preconceptual counseling, we do the organic acid test. And when I take clients through, what happens is 9 out of 10 people, I'm like, listen, based upon your genetics, based upon the data, based upon the clinical presentation, you need to wait 6 more months. Got to clean out, okay? Because when they conceive, you can't detox. You can, but it's very difficult. So if you get them 6 months to 9 months ahead of time, I'm saying create super babies, but that's what I have done. Most of the babies that I work with, the parents come back, Shawn, I can't thank you enough. I can't believe that I was spending $25,000 on fertility drugs when nobody looked to find out that there was a toxic mold in our house. Okay. Or the fact is, wow, because I had cellular hypothyroidism, even though my TSH was normal, everything was fine because of other factors going on at the cellular level, that you found glyphosates. Okay. You found glyphosates. Guess what? That causes cellular thyroid dysfunction. And when your thyroid's off, or iodine deficiency, I even have multiple cases I gave them PQQ. And guess what? Boom. Because you need mitochondrial function for the conception and also the development. Okay. So a lot of children being born mitochondrial dysfunction because of toxicity.
Yeah, and deficiencies. My girlfriend and I have been diving really deep into the work of Robert Crichton. Some people call him the dean of iron biology on planet Earth, and kind of butcher his work completely. So we've been posting quotes verbatim from him, and a lot of women go into pregnancy completely iron deficient, and not even anemic, nor normal hemoglobin, but iron deficient, ferritin below 30. And I just posted something yesterday on lysine in relationship to iron and hair loss, but I guess that amino acid L-lysine helps with iron and zinc uptake, and like that alone is increased ferritin for some people.
No, what happens from that, the pathway that works on is lysine increases docking of P5P. Without lysine, you don't dock P5P. When you don't dock P5P, you don't have activated B6. And when you don't have activated B6, you're going to have a form of iron anemia. That's, you need B6, form of B6 to activate the iron to do its job. Oh. One of the workarounds that I do for that is this. You use lactoferrin. Lactoferrin will increase your ferritin levels, but you have to use the right one. There's APO, and then there's the other one. You want to be careful because the APO actually can lower. Okay, the ones from Life Extension, we use them in iron toxicity a lot because it manages that. Okay, but there are clinical studies out there, and a lot of people I've worked with that when I use lactoferrin somewhere between 300 to 600 milligrams, they start to see the ferritin start to rise. Okay, especially in pregnant women. Can't take iron.
So what's the form for deficiency if APO is for overload? Do you remember? Is it hollow? I don't know. I'm losing track of all the different words for all that.
There's you just don't. There's only a few forms of APOE. I believe Yarrow has one, and then I know Life Extension has one.
Oh, here, yeah. I just searched. There are 3 different forms of lactoferrin. APO, like you said, iron-free, which maybe why has that effect. And then monoferric has 1 ferric iron. Hollow lactoferrin, I was close, has 2 iron ions. So either one of those, maybe the mono.
Either one of those, maybe, or you can also use colostrum. Colostrum has a little bit of lactoferrin. I believe it's like 50 milligrams per serving. But you know, the other thing you can do too is I believe you can use taurine to raise it up indirectly. Okay, because taurine is an amino acid that is a big workhorse. It's overstated. We give our children 500. I know it sounds crazy, but since we've been giving our children 500 milligrams of taurine, 250 to 500 milligrams of taurine a day, they sleep better. Their vocabulary has exploded. One of them just turned 2 and could do the alphabet all the way up to A, B, C, D, E, F, G.
Wow.
So
what do you say to people, Shawn, that like are the food only people? Because I get a lot of those, like, supplements are a scam. It's all marketing, et cetera. Just get it from food. Just eat red meat. Go carnivore or whatever for your iron, your amino acids. Do you think often food is not enough to correct imbalances?
Food is not enough because due to our world we live in, our metabolic demands, our gene expressions. I mean, 20 years ago when we had real food, okay, I'd say, yeah, okay. But now, no. I mean, look, glycine's going to rip, glyphosate's going to rip glycine and molybdenum out of your system, okay, flat out. So that's why you see a lot of people with, liver dysfunction because of the glycine. And then, the glyphosate inserts itself into the, mimics glycine, okay, through the work of Dr. Stephanie Smith, okay. But, the prime example about that, when you have a person that you do a workup on, and then you can I calibrate people's individual IVs based upon that, and you just see the amazing change, okay? Because the United States is like the United States of inflammation, is what I call it. We're inflamed, okay? Our guts are a wreck. We're eating all kinds of crap food, and it's just not that, but it's like walk outside and be a condo, you're going to get smacked with glyphosates. Okay, you live in a condo, you're going to get you're going to be fried by electromagnetic fields. Okay. And
yeah, I've been loving Doris Loh's work on EMFs and melatonin, but ascorbic acid blew my mind. It blew my paradigm wide open of whole food C being safer, even though it contains ascorbic acid, even though it increases iron absorption. Whole food C is not better than ascorbic acid. And I would say ascorbic acid is better to get into the high doses of raising ascorbate.
The thing about raising ascorbate is number one, look at how many years that the Rodin Institute has been doing vitamin C IVs, okay, and reducing cancer, okay? That alone should tell you enough, okay? I mean, yes, you got to be careful what kind of, IVs you do because you don't want corn or anything like that. You got to get stuff from, corn-free and GMO-free and stuff like that. But the thing is, there's a lot of approaches I question that I think they do have merit, but I think people get so locked into it, it becomes almost like a cult following. And I don't follow, I look at the trends, trends. It was, hypothyroidism. Then it went to adrenals. Then it went to methylation. And even before that, it was, curezone.com. Okay. Back in the day, you had the one person, the PG, the psyllium and psyllium bentonite clay. Okay, I forget her name, but she was always promoting them.
I remember Curezone. That was back in the day.
They were ahead of their time. Okay, they were on the ball. Okay, then you got you had Curezone, you had the candida, you had the candida rush, then you had the liver rush, then you had the the hypothyroidism, then you had the hypoadrenal, then you had methylation. I mean, you just see these current trends in medicine that, we become rats scurrying, trying to find the next magical potion or pill.
And I think it could be fun for curious people like us. I mean, I like trying a bunch of stuff, but for people that are just trying to get well and balanced, it can become frustrating, right?
It can become very frustrating because, I mean, you go on a Facebook book, you go on a hypothyroid Facebook, which I've seen many, many clients from. They come to me and it's like, I have hypothyroidism. And then you dig and you look at the dynamic relationship that they're in with their husband, their boss, and they're sitting there eating Mickey D's, out of depression. And I'm like, listen, I understand what you're trying to do, but I think you need a marriage counselor instead. Okay. So as a clinician, you can't have that one rice bowl. Okay. And I think that's what we're starting to see is, as one of my friends said, everybody's got to protect their rice bowl. And that's what makes what I do very unique is I take the wonderful work of all those practitioners. Okay. And what I do is I look at the pros and the cons, then I dig deeper into, okay, this looks good, but is it clinically relative? What kind of data to support, and that way, how can it be used applicably? How it can be used clinically to get a better outcome. So my philosophies and approaches are a conglomeration of hundreds of practitioners over the years. And what I've learned to do is I've learned to find out what works, what doesn't work, why it doesn't work. And that way I can relate it back to people saying, I went on this protocol. I'm like, okay, this works well for you, but because of your gene expression and these pathways being blocked, you should have done these 3 steps first before moving on to this one. Okay. Mm-hmm. As you said, it doesn't just become a puzzle. And the number one factor that I find in clinical outcomes is the order. And everybody asks me, Shawn, what is your protocol for mold? What is your protocol for Lyme? What is your protocol for this? I said, they do not exist. Okay. Because protocol for me is a 4-letter word. It's the best way I can explain it to people. And when people come in, you know who they've been to because you look at the sheet and like, oh, you went to this doctor, this doctor. How did you know? I said, when you see multiple times, you know where they're coming from. Okay.
Right. You answered a few of the Q&A questions because we had a bunch of people ask about protocol for Lyme, protocol for candida, all these different things. So,
well, let me explain in a nutshell basically what happens. Number one, what you need to do is you need to find out why can't the body adapt to its current environment? What factors are preventing that? Then you have to go in and look at what the factors are, then the pathways that are being altered. Okay, I'll give you an example. I worked for Lyme. I shifted the whole Lyme train of thought. One of the doctors was severely pissed because I actually found the connection between manganese and Lyme. Because I was on a doctor. I was actually personally invited by one of the top Lyme doctors to go into a research forum. I presented my information, and guess what happened? 2010, I was talking about manganese, and I posted about my findings. What happened? 2014, they found out, and they posted a study about it. So, which is fine.
That Lyme feeds on manganese, you're saying, right?
No, actually, manganese is deficient because of the oxidative stress caused by the Lyme.
Oh, wow. Because you always hear a pathogen eats a metal, right? Like pathogens feed on iron or pathogens feed.
I had a client that was seeing a prestigious Lyme doctor, and they read that and they pulled all their magnesium. Next thing you know, I told them and called them. I said, this is not appropriate. And they were too happy about that. But guess what? Their client almost ended up committing suicide because when they dropped his magnesium down, they went into a suicidal mode.
Wow.
because they pulled all the magnesium feeds Lyme, don't do it. I had her
Wow.
I had her stabilized, everything. She was doing great. Nope. Doctor pulled it, and I got this call, frantic email. I'm like, get back on your magnesium.
Wow. It's scary how these nutrient deficiencies really affect someone's behavior and emotions. Like the B12 documentary I was watching last night, some woman that just had a baby was having thoughts of killing her newborn baby, and she was diagnosed with severe B12 deficiency. They treated it. She stopped having those thoughts.
Right.
You know, and same with suicidal thoughts, or, you know, I think a lot of this emotional, you know, instability comes back to nutrient deficiencies, right? Imbalances.
Yeah, I would have to agree 100% about that. And, you know, those are the type of cases that you look if you have suicidal thoughts. You know, when you have the MTHFR, I discovered by looking at the multiple, you know, when I get a report that has multiple MTHFRs, the first thing I'll ask is like, has anybody in your family, immediate family, committed suicide or tried to commit suicide? Okay. And then I'll have people go back, like, no. Then you start asking around, like, they'll come back to me, like, Shawn, I don't know how you knew this, but I had an uncle who committed suicide. So by looking at that, you're able to tell and potentially predict. And again, I'm just sharing my clinical experiences with them, saying, you may want to go back and research this a little more to see if you find anything. And it was not a second or third uncle. It was a first uncle that was a distant uncle that not too many people had contact with. So it was in the family history. And she had no idea, you know? So that's why when I've actually been on calls to where people were, you know, told me that, Shawn, I can't thank you enough, because what I told him is I said, based upon your genetic predisposition, you may feel like if you go down that dark road, that unfortunately you're going to be more likely to go on autopilot. And I told people to, when you get to a certain level, before you get to that autopilot, let people know. I had several, when I'm providing that information while I was doing genetics, I had several calls thanking me for saving their lives, because it was a prediction on, because once you go down that dark road, sometimes there's just no turning back. But if you catch yourself before you start to go there saying, oh, Shawn told me about this, you know, so he alerted me to that from the console, and it saved a few people's lives.
That's incredible. That's awesome. I have a question for you, Shawn. Like electrolyte imbalance, this is something that I've been thinking about lately. I just got like Carolyn Dean's, you know, Pico potassium. I've been taking that. Tastes horrible, but I shoot it. And, you know, the RDA for potassium is 4,700 milligrams, which for me seems hard to get. I don't know. I know it's in meat. I know it's in potatoes, fruit. I have none up here until I grow it myself. That's good. But what are your thoughts, since you've been talking about magnesium, of like, do you think a lot of people that have health issues, they don't have that foundation down of getting enough salt, getting enough, you know, potassium?
It really depends on a lot of different things. Number one, supplements. Like I have a lot of people come in to me that are taking licorice root and heavy dosages. So you'll often see that they'll be dumping potassium as a result, because licorice root eats potassium. Okay, you can go hypokalemic on that. Okay, so you have to be very, very cautious about that. Number two, you've got to look at what condition are you treating. Okay, first of all, man, water balance is controlled by the adrenal glands. Water balance is controlled by the hypothalamus in regards to the antidiuretic hormone. It's caused, you know, kidneys, aldosterone, renin. So when people start dealing with these conditions, you really have to dig deep into, the endocrine system controls a lot of the water and electrolytes themselves. So oftentimes when you have like antidiuretic hormone, you're going to need more sodium than potassium. If you're going to have POTS, you might need to balance it out with more potassium, but more potassium than sodium, or maybe vice versa. So when it comes, even with B12, if you take too much B12, there's a potential that you can lower your potassium levels from it. Okay. But your potassium levels are controlled by the adrenal glands. So if your body, and insulin too. So if you're hyperinsulinic, you're going to have lower potassium levels. Okay.
Do you think it's relatively safe for most people to just shotgun and take, there's like these electrolyte powders, Costco has them now, and, everyone, you can buy them everywhere, but those little, electrolyte powders and stuff, or potassium chloride or whatever, like, do you think they can't cause harm to most people to take them? Or
I like to take a moderation approach. I like to say somewhere between 1 to 2 grams supplement it. The one that I found I like the best is optimal electrolyte. And what I'll do is I'll take optimal electrolyte and add a half teaspoon of sea salt to it and do that 2 times a day. And when it comes to electrolytes, you don't want to shotgun them. Okay. Would you walk into a IV place and ask them to do a sodium chloride push? No. Okay. They have to be trickled through. Okay. So I usually tell people to get good, clean water and add them in your water and sip them throughout the daytime. That's why you need 2 servings of them. Okay. And this way, by using a liter of water or whatever, you measure the amount of liquid you're taking in too. And people don't know how much water they're not drinking. Okay. As a result, because, I had one person that I said, try to get a liter. She goes, and she drank like 1 cup of tea a day. Then she wondered why she was having, confusion and disorientation, and tried to blame it on Lyme and mold. I said, you're dehydrated. The other thing is when your arachidonic acid to EPA ratio is off, you are pushing cellular inflammation. So therefore, the water is not going to enter into the cell as it should. And we do know that lithium and taurine are crucial for allowing electrolytes inside and outside the cell to control osmolarity. That's why I like the optimal electrolyte from Seeking Health, because it's got the taurine in it already. It's got the creatine in it. It's got the sodium in it. Because I have people with low adrenals, they need a higher sodium to potassium ratio because they tend to not hold on to sodium. And then if you have a mold person, sometimes you need to do the same thing, because when the antidiuretic hormone levels are low, you're not getting sodium inside the cell. So you're kicking out more than you're putting in.
I like that. I like that approach because it's individualized, because a lot of practitioners will say the ratio is this in the body of sodium to potassium for every single person. And that's not the case, right?
No, because if you have other things going on that will affect electrolyte balances, that's why I focus heavily on endocrine system. The endocrine system is one of the major switches for turning everything around. When people come to me, a lot of the time I follow a system that I call BEG, biliary endocrine system gut. Okay. That is where the magic happens, on top of foundational work. Okay. Because if you're running adrenal insufficiency and you're doing more potassium than sodium, you're making your condition worse. Okay. And sometimes you may have to do more potassium in certain situations and lower sodium in others. So just because a person comes in with adrenal insufficiency, I might have them do 2-to-1 ratio of sodium potassium in the morning. But if they're doing licorice root or anything like that, I may have them bump it up to potassium more to 1 on, when they start their licorice root. So it's always constantly shifting and changing based upon numerous parameters and factors. And that's why you always have to look ahead in these cases, because otherwise you're potentially, doing unintentional harm.
And sauna use too, right? Like I have an outdoor barrel sauna, and sweating, you lose. I was actually reading, my girlfriend found the study, you lose more copper than iron in a sauna. It's a significant amount of copper. It goes 1 to 2 milligrams or something like that.
Yeah. And the thing about sauna is it's going to stimulate your lymphatic system. Your lymphatic system is going to stimulate your bile. So you'll actually be increasing your liver capacity, and then you give glutathione before going in, you even enhance them more. That's why when I have people that have mold toxicity and electrolyte imbalances due to adrenals or, estrogen, testosterone, or what other, kidney issues, you may, want them to, instead of guzzle, sometimes you may want to have them do it before. Sometimes you may want to do them, sip on it during. So, it really depends upon the person of how you approach. It's just not going in, and sip on, electrolytes. Maybe you need them beforehand. Okay. Maybe you need them because of a unique scenario in your biochemistry that, that just like working out, maybe you need a pre-workout drink rather than having that branched chain amino acids during your workout. Okay. Yeah. So it's really, like you said, individualized, because you just can't shotgun things. And that's
sorry, go ahead.
And that's the major issue that I see in cases.
Right on. Yeah, I'm trying not to interrupt you, but I have so many questions. We'll have to do another round. But have you seen clients use cold thermogenesis? Because I went heavy into that for a while, and I thought I felt a benefit, definitely a brain buzz that lasted all day.
Well,
and now that I live in a cold climate with a lake, considering doing plunges, not soaks. I'm curious your thoughts on it.
Because because of mold toxicity and how it affects the stratum of the brain, it causes dopamine imbalances. And what happened is I always felt better during the wintertime when I went out with went out with barely any shirt and no coat and stuff. I felt better. What happens is you're getting a dopamine rush. Okay. And too much dopamine can be problematic depending upon your gene expression. But if you are DRD2 gene expression to where you have a dopamine, deficiency because of the work from Dr. Bloom, it's the reward deficiency syndrome, then you're going to respond to the dopaminergic type of reactions. Okay. So again, it's like you go to cold thermogenesis, that usually tells me that maybe your dopamine levels might be a little bit on the lower side. Okay. And that you need that boost. Okay. It does boost your metabolism for sure. Okay. Either, it's very similar to the chemistry of hyperthermia versus otherwise. It stimulates your metabolism. Okay. It's a great way to increase autophagy. Believe it or not.
Interesting. Yeah. I wonder, with all the social media use, I feel like our dopamine is constantly under attack no matter what, even for guys not watching pornography, which is an issue with dopamine, right? But just being on the internet, I feel like it's a constant dopamine rush, right?
Yeah, it really is, because what it does is it creates artificial adrenaline. With blue lights added to the mix, and with lack of natural light, you create a huge circadian imbalance.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. I wanted to ask you about this, Shawn. I recently had 4 cavities filled. It was my first dental work since having teeth pulled, and I measured my highly sensitive C-reactive protein back in 2016, and it was 10. I measured it again a month and a half ago. It was 10. And then I got the dental work done. I got a deep cleaning. They gave me the nitrous. They knocked me out. My gums were super, super sensitive because I was kind of anti-dentist. There's that kind of trend right now in the health community where you don't need toothpaste or toothbrush or mouthwash. And, there's kind of that messaging going on. You don't need to see the dentist if you're on XYZ protocol or diet. And I kind of fell into that. It was like, yeah, I could just do all my dental stuff at home, oil pull, tongue scrape. I got this. Went in, lo and behold, 4 cavities. And I was keeping them at bay. They weren't root canals like most people have. It wasn't near the nerve. So obviously my K2 dosing was working. What I was doing was working. Cod liver oil, I'm sure that helped. But just curious if you've heard of that before, because people were saying, oh, that's amazing that your gum inflammation brought your, solving your gum inflammation brought your CRP from 10 to, 0.5. But I'm wondering if the cavities were involved as well or both, because the dentist was like, yeah, you had receding bone and gum, both. And this is, I drink coffee, but I swish with water after. I drink orange juice or whatever I swish with water. So I'm very cognizant. But since then, I got an electric toothbrush. My brother inspired me. Sauna care, I do the water pick and stuff. But I think that's kind of an overlooked cause of inflammation, right? Like dental issues and being anti-dentist.
You bring up a very good point, because when you look in clinical studies, periodontal disease is one of the major increases of C-reactive protein, and periodontal disease is linked into cardiovascular disease. And one of the reasons being is if there's an infection, because of the location, it's directly into the bloodstream. You also have the oral microbiome present. So when you have infection and people may not, they tend to be more mouth breathers and nose breathers, you're affecting the oral intolerance and the microbiome. So you can do all your oil pulling, but the oral intolerance and the gut microbiome are bidirectional. So you mentioned that you're doing a GI MAPS test. So it would be interesting to see if your prevotella is going to be high. And the prevotella is usually an indication that there's some type of dental issue going on. Because oftentimes when prevotella is high, it usually indicates the next question I ask, have you had root canals or had cavities that were filled that may have been infected? And usually it's a high probability that they have in the past. So it'd be interesting to see how your microbiome reflects that.
Are spore-based organisms, probiotic therapy, helpful for the prevotella overgrowth? Or
spore-based probiotics hit a wide range of organisms. I'm more of a prebiotic guy and postbiotic guy. I like specific fibers. I like specific short chain fatty acids that are end products. When I look at the microbiome, I'm looking at what's deficient, why it's deficient, and the end products of what they create.
Have you used fluorophage? Have you used those? Fluorophages? That's a prebiotic.
I have not used fluorophage, but I'm very familiar with phage approach to how they go in and they kill off the bacteria, and then the dead bodies become food for the beneficial bacteria. The one thing that I really stay fast on, I don't believe in doing a lot of killing. I've seen too many traumatic experiences for that when it was not necessary. So I tend to shift the microbiome to create the optimal terrain. And as I mentioned before, sometimes the pathogens may look pathogenic, but they may be shifting as an adaptive state to try to help us out when specific pathways are not working right. So a person sees H. pylori. Well, H. pylori is a hydrogen sulfide producing bacteria. And most people with H. pylori, if you look on their organic acid test, you're going to see their sulfation pathway jammed. So what happens is the H. pylori is potentially pushing hydrogen sulfide to get to the end game, which is glutathione. But unfortunately, because of environmental toxins, nutritional deficiencies, we get stuck and we produce more hydrogen sulfide than actually sulfate.
Interesting.
So,
wow.
Sometimes in that situation, that's where the work of Dr. Greg Nye, Elliot Overton, questions that the microbiome is trying to help us out. And a lot of the organisms that I started to look into are phenol producing. And phenol producing bacteria are actually very protective in helping out with mycotoxins. So again, we have to question, is that Clostridia rising up because it produces the toxic phenol as a defense mechanism? Or is our microbiome trying to shift it to try to get to a specific pathway that we're not providing the substrate for? And that's where using the Epsom salt baths, that's where potentially using glutathione, as I believe I provided documentation how glutathione was actually used to eradicate H. pylori and the mucosa. Well, my question there is was it eradicating it, or did the body see it as a negative feedback loop, saying, listen, I got glutathione coming in, I got sulfur coming in. Guess what, guys? You don't need me no longer. So we need to look at the microbiome with a different set of lenses. And,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
and change the functional medicine philosophy of kill, 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 kill. When you're potentially doing more damage to the microbiome, especially with people that I have people that have been on protocols for 6 to 12 weeks of using heavy antimicrobials. And it actually, it may took care of SIBO, but in the interim, it caused other problems because they were on it too long, or they were on the wrong probiotic or prebiotic as a result. So,
wow. Do you think that yeast therapy, what's that beneficial yeast that people supplement for H. pylori? I'm blanking on the name. Saccharomyces boulardii.
Saccharomyces boulardii has been a godsend because Saccharomyces, what it does is it increases secretory IgA. When you increase secretory IgA, what that does is that's kind of like the patrol guard. When your secretory IgA is down, it's kind of like having a crossing guard who's drunk, and you've got Canadians coming across and Americans coming across the same border, and he just decides on which one goes through and who doesn't without looking at passports. And that's kind of what's happened to secretory IgA is it's a tagging system. it tags what's good and what's bad, what to let through and what not to, what react to, what not to react. So when your secretory IgA is down, your immune response, not just in your microbiome, but all your mucosa, your nasal, your mouth, your lungs, vaginal areas in females are also susceptible to those immunological challenges. And it's just not organisms. It's also environmental toxins, like mycotoxins. Mycotoxins will lower your secretory IgA. And what Saccharomyces does is Saccharomyces actually has been shown to increase secretory IgA and also increase alkaline phosphatase. Wow. So when you increase alkaline phosphatase, you're actually increasing the mucosa response, and also alkaline phosphatase is necessary for releasing specific enzymes to help us break down different foods on the mucosal wall. So there's a lot of practitioners out there that are hesitant about giving Saccharomyces. If a person is immunological and challenged, I may go easy with it. Otherwise, you can use it pretty strongly. And what it does is it helps to create the scaffolding for the beneficial bacteria to take hold. And it crowds out the pathogenic bacteria itself. So it does help with not just H. pylori, but it creates the scaffolding for the other beneficial bacteria to take hold. Especially people with FUT2 usually have low alkaline phosphatase because the mucosa barrier is more inflamed because of the FUT2, because you're going to have a high potential of having low bifidobacterium. And when you have FUT2, you're going to be more susceptible to dysbiosis. And then when you work in genes, everything works in a synergistic standpoint. So if you're FUT2, you have PEMT, you have SHMT, guess what? You're going to be more prone to good old leaky gut as a result. And just not from bacteria, but also you're going to open up the door to mycotoxins. A lot of people that have gut dysbiosis have problems with mycotoxins because that helps to set up when mycotoxins set up shop, what they do is they help degrade glutathione, which helps to replace the mucosa barrier. Okay. You need glutathione to seal it. You need vitamin E to seal it. So if you're glutathione deficient, you're going to be vitamin C deficient. You're going to be vitamin E deficient. You're going to be coenzyme Q10 deficient because glutathione helps those nutrients work more effectively.
And they mess with the NRF2 pathway, right?
They do mess with the NRF2 pathway. And when you mess with the NRF2 pathway, glutathione, nitric oxide, and superoxide all get dysregulated as a result,
Wow. Well, with all this talk about the benefits of sulfur and you talked about taurine, it's interesting, being in the supplement world, because that's a fascination of mine to study them. I've heard, and I've said this before, magnesium chloride baths are better, quote unquote, than magnesium sulfate. But now I'm thinking, what if someone's sulfur deficient? What if that sulfur with the magnesium in that float tank or whatever is actually more beneficial because they need sulfur more than chloride? Or, I've also heard the argument that you're taking magnesium for magnesium. Why would you take it, magnesium taurine or magnesium glycinate? But we need taurine and we need glycinate, right? Or glycine for glyphosate. So there are benefits to taking these bound forms, right, of sulfur or taurine or glycine to magnesium. The magnesium might be a small part of it. Out of 2 grams, maybe you're only getting a couple 100 milligrams of magnesium, but so what? Amino acids are super powerful, right, for so many things.
Here's what I found about the chelates. I've been taking magnesium glycinate, 600 milligrams before going to bed for years. And the pathway that's associated with the puric acid on the organic acid test, which is the glycine pathway, is still high. So I question whether those glycine molecules are actually getting utilized by the body, and they're just a transport system. Second one is I had a client, female, who had a sulfur transferase issue going on, which I caught on her Dutch test because her DHEA total was high and her DHAS was low. And 4 weeks, she came back to me. I said, "How you doing?" She goes, "Shawn, I lost weight." I said, "You did?" She goes, "Yeah." She goes, "It didn't stop." She goes, "I was using magnesium chloride. And then as soon as I switched over to the sulfate, that's when I noticed that my inflammation started to go down."
Wow. Hey, Shawn, I'm so sorry. There's a freight truck on my camera. I was not expecting a delivery today. Could we just do like a 5 or 10 minute bathroom break? Is that cool? I don't know.
Yeah, I kind of got to get going because of.
Are we around 2 hours? Oh, that's right. Yeah. Okay. Maybe we'll wrap it up and we'll have to do a round two because I'm fascinated with your info. I lost track of time. I'm enjoying talking with you so much, but I get random freight stuff and it's like, I don't even remember what this is. Yeah, he's looking for me. So, but yeah, we'll definitely do a round two soon if you're up for it and dive deeper. I mean, I'll save these questions that people sent in. But yeah, this was amazing. Your website, I think I have it up here.
The best way to contact me, because I'm revamping the website, is my email address at matrixhealthwell@gmail.com.
Awesome. And you're taking one-on-one consultations, right?
I'm taking one-on-one consultations. I also I do one-on-one with peer-to-peer.
Awesome.
I'm working on, I also do mentoring with clinicians to have them work one-on-one or do groups. So
Awesome.
They can contact me. You don't have to be a medical doctor. If you are, that's great. But I work with practitioners, lay people who just want to get deeper, biohackers that want to get a deeper understanding.
I'll definitely be working with you, I'm sure. This was definitely a crash course. I mean, this is probably the most dense show I've done out of the almost 200. So I took a lot of notes. Hopefully people did. I mean, so many rabbit holes that you talked about. I definitely want to go into more of those in our next show and maybe have different focuses. But I think this could help a lot of people that have been looking for answers for many different problems. So really appreciate you taking the time, Shawn. This was awesome, and we definitely have to do it again.
Matt, it's a pleasure to be on the show and looking forward to our next show.
Right on. Thanks, Shawn. Stick around to close it out. That's a wrap for today's show. I love all the nuance that Shawn integrates into his practice because context is so important, and I see that often missing in the natural health community, where it's everybody has iron overload and iron deficiency doesn't exist, or whatever extreme view that someone has. There's people with different genetics and different pathways that are more active than others. So I liked when Shawn shared his philosophy that why can't the body adapt to the current environment? It's because you have to go in and find the pathways involved and see which pathways are not functioning well, and then support those with individualized nutrition. And I think that approach is so valuable for people with chronic health conditions because you can get to the root of why you feel how you feel. If you have fatigue or memory problems or mood disturbances and imbalances, you can really go in and rebalance those areas of life just by having this individualized, nuanced approach. So that term being floxed is new to me. I had not heard of that, but apparently it's a big issue. And it's fascinating that Shawn pioneered the NAD therapy and high-dose vitamin C as the remedy or even consistent vitamin C use, which is what I do. I just take it consistently throughout the day, every hour, if I feel like building up my body's ascorbate levels. And I definitely notice an increased resistance to stress and just overall feeling better, getting my ascorbate levels higher. If you guys want to dive deeper into Shawn Bean's work, you can head over to matrixhealthwell.com. He provides consultations, and I really think he offers such a great service with just such a balanced approach that can really help people to heal. If you want to check out my work, you can go to matt-blackburn.com. I have some blog posts there, recipes, and if you click on shop, you can see all of my recommended products. And I just threw up the ionic potassium up on the front page of my website. Potassium is such a crucial mineral. And if you're supplementing magnesium, it's a good idea to be on potassium because they work together so closely. And to retain magnesium, you need potassium. And the RDA is 4,700 milligrams, so that's quite a bit. And with this ionic pico potassium, I just add it to a half 12-ounce mason jar full of water and down it. It makes me feel amazing. I actually feel it almost immediately. So, huge fan of potassium supplementation. I've tried a lot of the different capsule powdered forms, and I feel the best so far on this pico potassium. If you want to check out my brand, you can go over to mitolife.co, and a lot of really exciting things in the works. The Mitolife drinking water filter will be released by the end of the year, so that's very exciting. That's been a project 2 years in the making. I actually started my health journey with researching water quality, and I've spent several months to years exclusively on different types of water, and I really feel the best from this type of water that the Mitolife filter makes. So that's it. I am headed off to get my first IV vitamin push. Going to see how I feel after that. Really curious with all the buzz around it to just experience it for myself. Tune in every Friday for a new show and stay supercharged.